It's Domino. It's Domino. It's Domino. And today I have a video that I'm pretty excited about because I get to talk about stuff that I like. Again, I get to talk about it. So today I've just been thinking that I would really like to do a little bit of a more of a formal tutorial just about like what Protoflux is. So that's kind of just gonna be like, well, I'm gonna tell you what it is. I'm gonna tell you how to interface with it, so how you're gonna use it, like with tools and such, and why you would do that. And then we'll be making something together that you could follow along with if you'd like to learn how this sort of stuff works. But if not, you are more than welcome to just sit back and relax and listen to me ramble about something that I really enjoy. So, a little bit of preamble, just because, we gotta get the whispers in before I get too excited and I start yelling. Hopefully not, I won't be yelling. But, so, what is Protoflux? Well, Protoflux is it's the in-game scripting language for Resonite, which is the game that we're in right now. This is Resonite. So I've loved programming for, well, my whole existence. I was really lucky, and I was part of a lot of young learning programs for programming. So they had me on Scratch like really early, like kindergarten through 6th grade or something. So it was always really accessible to me, and I just like fell in love with it. So when I found a VR game that I could program in socially with furries, that is the moment that I bought a VR headset, and that was back in Neos. So I've done a lot of Protoflux. I wouldn't say that I'm the best at it. There's certainly so many more talented people out there, and certainly a lot of better tutorials, like tutorials with more substance. But this is kind of just an entertainment thing. Mostly just for the sounds, I guess, but I do want it to be genuinely educational and a useful resource if some of you would like to seep the knowledge into your brains overnight or something. I don't know. So, what is Protoflux? Protoflux is the Resonite scripting language. And I use it to do everything in here. So, my toggles, well, actually that's more context menu, but, so you see my ears? You see how much they turn when I turn my head? Well, that's because of Protoflux. So what I'm doing is, I'm reading the rotation of my head, and I'm then mapping that to rotations which I apply to my ears. Or maybe they're blend shapes. Actually, I think they're blend shapes, but it's the same kind of deal. Also, my gestures, so the blep and the blink and all that sort of stuff, that's all done by reading my controller inputs with Protoflux. Reading the controller inputs, and then I'm applying the blend shapes to my avatar based on the like how much I'm gripping down on my triggers, basically. So you can do all sorts of stuff, like you can change the color of your avatar with Protoflux. You can make a little watch that tells you the time. You can, you could do a hug counter. You could do a high five system. All sorts of things. Really, the world is your oyster. So you might be asking, well, how do I get started with Protoflux? How do I start? Where do I begin? 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 Well, that all starts with the Protoflux tip. This one. So, you can find this in Essentials folder. I think that's what it's called, right? The Resonite Essentials, yes. If you go in there, you go to the Tools folder. It is the second item in there. It's this one. So, you can equip this, and then once you have it equipped, you should notice some new items in your radio menu here. And I'll switch to a smooth POV for now, that you can see from my point of view what I'm doing. So, the radio menu. This is the radio menu. You won't have this one. This one's just for me. But you will see a browse nodes button, which is really important. And then unequip. But that's basically it. So you have this tool, which is like pretty cool, I think. Basically, you can press this little button here and you have access to all of the nodes that you could possibly want. Every node you could possibly want. All the nodes, all the nodes, all the nodes, all the nodes. So, it's really intimidating right now, because there's everything. This is everything. There's nothing held back from you here. I have a little mod up here that I believe it was Cyro made that, and it's for searching nodes in here. So if I wanted to, if I wanted the tan float, I could just search for that instead of going to math, trig, tan, float. So that, you can see it takes a lot of time to navigate without the mod, but I did it for a long time in Neos and early Resonite, so it's not too bad once you get the hang of it. But if you're a little bit into Resonite, you might notice that this tool isn't like all the other tools that you see people using. You might have seen something more like this, like a fancy one, like this guy. So that's the one that I would be using, and that's the one that I do use. But if you're just getting into Protoflux, starting with the basic tools, I would say is a really good idea, because the features that other tools add, as cool as they are, you might get lost in the amount of features. And if you don't know from the start, what it should look like without the features, then you might not be able to know when the features are working properly, or that the features even exist at all. So, starting with the default tool is what I did for probably 2 years. I just really preferred them. But that's just some guy's advice. Like, you do whatever you want. If you wanna start with, this is Zeravi's tool. If you wanna start with Zeravi's tool, go ahead, you can try that. But for this tutorial, I'll just be using the default tool. So that's what Flux is. And you're gonna need this tool to do any Flux. So now, we can move on to actually getting started here. So addition to the Protoflux tool, this is the dev tool. And where we found the Protoflux tool, this one was right next to it. It was the first item, I believe, in the tools folder of the Resonite Essentials. And this one is for creating game objects and looking at game objects and that sort of stuff. So, let me lay out an idea for you. I would like to make a little ball that shrinks when you put your hand near it. A very shy ball. An extremely shy ball. A very, very, very shy ball. So, what I'm going to do is, with this dev tip, I'm going to open up the radio menu, and I'm going to create a new object. I'm going to create an empty object. So, this will make, right here, this is where this empty object lives. It's made a slot here, and it's opened up an inspector panel for me the slot. So on the left here, we have the slots hierarchy, and on the right, we have the slots properties. So I'm going to change the name of this, and I'm gonna call it Shy Ball. I'm then going to add a grabbable component. So I did that really fast, but at the bottom there, I'm going to attach a component. I'm going to go to Transform, Interaction, and Grabbable. So the reason that I'm doing this is because I'm going to put stuff inside this empty object, and I want this to be the root of that object. So this is the parent of everything else that we're going to do in here. And I want that parent to be grabbed as the object itself. So I've added that little grabbable component. Now it won't actually be grabbable right now because there's nothing to collide with, but we can change that. We can change that. So our Shy Ball, we will create a new object. It will be a 3D model and a sphere. So this is our ball for our Shy Ball. So I'm going to select this ball. I'm going to open a new inspector. So here's the ball. I'm going to drag that ball into the Shy Ball root. So now we have this Shy Ball root, and then we have our sphere. I'm going to reset the position, the rotation, and the scale. And then I'm going to delete the grabbable component from this sphere. So, why am I doing all of this? I'm also going to deselect. Why am I doing all of this? This isn't Flux. You came here for Flux, and you must feel so betrayed right now. And you're right, it isn't Flux. But Flux goes hand in hand with just all of the other development tools that we have here in Resonite. So right now I'm just setting up the basis. I'm laying the foundation for what we can work on, what the Flux is actually going to interact with. So we have an empty object here. Well, it's not empty anymore, but an empty object with a grabbable component, and then I just put a sphere in it. I reset all its properties, and then I deleted the grabbable. So now you can grab this around. And the sphere is part of Shy Ball here. So this ball is not shy enough. Look at it. It's barely shy. So how are we going to fix that? Well, the plan is to change the scale of this ball based on how far your hand is from it. So we're going to need some information here. We are going to need the sphere itself. So with the Protoflux tool here, I'm going to physically grab from the inspector, physically grab that slot. Then I'm going to come over here and, oh sorry, I just touched the microphone. I always forget that you're there. I'm going to open my radio menu, and then I'm going to select reference. So now we have this little node here that is a reference to our sphere. It's a sphere reference. And if I press my primary down, well, it's pointed at this, I get a little link to this node. If I am holding onto this link and I press my secondary, which on a Quest 2, which I am, is pressing my joystick down, then I can see what this node is referencing. So it's referencing the slot sphere, and that's all I really care about. It's referencing sphere, and the parent is Shy Ball. So we don't care about that too much, but that'll come in handy later. Then, if we're going to be changing the scale of this sphere based on some hand position, then we're also going to need the scale property of this sphere. So here in the inspector, we can see I have sphere selected, and I'm going to grab the scale from this. Also, this mirror is going crazy, so I'm just going to turn that off. So I'm grabbing the scale property property. I'm grabbing the scale property. And then, much like we did before, I'm going to open up my radio menu, but instead of pressing reference this time, I'm going to press drive. So when I do that, you can see that this one, since it's a source, it's a reference, it gives information. This one is a drive. It sets information, so it doesn't give us anything. So at this point, you'll look back to your beautiful ball, and you'll notice, where's my ball gone? Where has it gone? It was right there a second ago. But in the properties here, we can just see that the scale has been set to 0, 0, 0. So the ball is still there. It's just extremely shy. So, how we remedy that in the meantime? In this value here where we're driving, I'm going to click my primary, I'm going to hold my primary, so we get this little linkage, and then I'm going to press my secondary, and I'm going to type in 1, and then drag that into all three. Or you can type it in all three, whatever you want. Now our ball is back, and it has scale 1, 1, 1. So we have a source of the ball. We have the scale that we're going to drive. Now, how do we do this fun bit of relating this information together with the nearest user hand? Well, this is done for you. It's really quite simple. So I'm not going to use my search. I'm going to limit myself from my search. But if we go down to avatars and nearest user hand, if we double click that, you can see here at my tool, now it says nearest user hand right there. So I can spawn out this component, I can spawn out this node, and it has multiple inputs here. What I want, though, specifically, is the distance. The distance is really what we're concerned with. So, by default, this node is using the distance between my hand and the node itself. So as my hand is further away, it's at 0.3, and as it gets closer, it's at 1.3. Just like that, you can see it. So instead of referencing this node, what I would like to do is reference the sphere. So now, if I move my hand over here, it's not doing much, right? Well, that's because now we're talking about the distance to the sphere. So if my hand close is at 0.5, and further away is at 0.8. So now we're getting the distance information of my hand to the sphere, just like that, just as easily as that. So, how did I know how to do that at all? Well, mostly because I have a ton of practice, but if you were lost, also, deleting the connection is done by dragging a line, which you can do with holding down the trigger, like so, with your Protoflux tool, but dragging a line physically through a connection. Physically through. So how did I know how to do that? Well, what does this reference even take? If I hover over it, it'll tell me a reference is a slot. So I would need to connect that to something that says slot like this. So I can connect it just like that. And then this distance, float. It's a float, which is a number with a decimal place. Which, like, you know, if I didn't know it went in this display, I could see that it's a float there, and I could connect it like that. I'm just gonna check the time here, see how I'm doing. I'm at 22 minutes already, oh my goodness. Okay, so we have this float now, we have this distance here. But the problem is, if I only want this ball to be maximum that size, I don't want it to be bigger than that. And right now, this value can read upwards of 1. It can read way more than 1. And I don't want that. So I'm going to add another node here. And that would be in math. And then it's just called clamp 01. unchanged. We can see 0.5 passes through unchanged. We can see 0.9 passes through unchanged. But what about 1.1? 1.1 becomes 1. Well, what about negative 0.01? Well, that's also 0. So this clamp 0, 1 component will basically, it won't change any values between 0 and 1. But values less than 0 and greater than 1 they become 0 and 1 respectively. So a value greater than 1 becomes 1, and a value less than 0 becomes 0. Which is precisely what I want our shy ball to be doing. So I'll delete those nodes, and then I'll make that connection here. So we have that clamp now. And this is a very small amount of Protoflux, but I just want to do something really easy and kind of silly. And if you guys like this sort of thing, I would love to do something more complicated and explain all the thought process maybe as I go. But so we have this information, which is what I would like the scale to be. Yeah, that's working nicely. Oh, sorry. That's working nicely, so we can see that. I would like, actually, what size is this sphere? This isn't radius 1, it's radius 0.5. So, instead of my maximum value being 1, I'm going to make my maximum value 0.5 by multiplying. And I'm not going to use the search feature. So, under math, I can go to value, oh shoot, where is it? It will be, oh gosh, I hate looking for this sort of stuff. Oh, it's an operator, sorry. So under operators, I'm going to go to value mul, oh gosh, where is it? Oh, no, okay, I'll just go into mul, and then I'll scroll all the way to the bottom until I get value mul, and then I'm going to choose a float is our type. A float is our type, so I have this operator here which takes 2 floats, and it returns a float. So I'm going to multiply 1 by 0.5, and that becomes 0.5. So our maximum value here is going to be between 0 and 0.5, because this 0 and 1 is multiplied by, this value of 0 to 1 is now multiplied by 1/2. So the biggest value it can give me is 0.5. The biggest value is 0.5. So now I can plug this into scale, but actually I can't, you'll notice. There's data loss, and this just won't work, because this is a float, and this is a float 3. So we need to find a way to make one number become 3 numbers, a float 3. And we can do that by packing. So under operators, we go to packing, we go to pack 3, and we're going to pack 3 floats with a pack float 3. So with this, we take our multiplied value and plug it into the x and the y and the z. Now, as we approach the shy ball, instead of just 1 number, we have 3 numbers here. So we can see as I'm close, it's 0.28, and as I'm far, it's 0.49. So what I'm going to do is just plug this value into scale, and then delete these bits here, and you'll see, oh shoot, I'm also going to, in here, change this radius from 0.5 to 1, because the previous scale was 1. Sorry, the previous scale was 0.5, this whole scale to 0.5. Yeah, that's silly, but that's what we're doing. So this shy ball, when I approach it, it becomes very shy. It's extremely shy. It just doesn't like being touched. And that's the shy ball. So, just with this much Protoflux, we have a reference to the ball, the sphere. We have the distance from our hand to that sphere. We're clamping it, and then we're multiplying it by 0.5, and then we're packing it to an XYZ, and then setting the scale of the ball to the distance, to the clamped and multiplied distance. So this ball is pretty much done, but there's a very important thing we have to do here. We have to make a child of shy ball and call it, well, it doesn't have to be called this, but I'm going to personally call it Flux. Flux. So with that selected, that doesn't matter, but with our Protoflux tip in hand, I'm going to point at any one of these nodes, and I'm going to hold down my secondary button. So that'd be the same button that I use to create displays. I'm going to point at this guy, or anything, sure, this one, and then I'm going to hold down the select. Now all of these are selected, and I can move them all at once, they're all selected. But then, with them all selected, I'm going to grab this flux object here, slot. The flux slot I'm going to grab, open my radio menu, and then I'm going to select pack into. So now the flux has disappeared, and it now lives in here. It lives right here. So this shy ball has been what we call packed. And why we pack is because when we save this shy ball, we want it to save with all of the programming. Because if we saved it without packing, it would not be reactive. All of the driving and all of the effort that we did will not work until you pack it in if you want to save it. So this is our shy ball. It's quite a happy shy ball. It's great. It's wonderful. And as a little bit of personalization, I'm going to, I don't know if you'll just have to find a tool to use here that can draw, but I'm going to draw, or I'm going to try to draw, oh boy, I'm going to try to draw a little happy face for him. I just hit my mic. I'm going to draw a little happy face. Just like this. And then I'm going to select these guys here. These brush strokes. This is just because I'm being silly. I don't expect anyone to do this with me, but I'm going to put all these brush strokes under my sphere. And now they're parented to it. So now my shy ball has a little face. So that's just like a really, really simple introduction to like some silly thing you can do with Flux. This is my shy ball, and you can save that in your inventory. If you navigate somewhere, you can save to creations. I'll put mine in creations. So you grab it, and then you click save to inventory in your radio menu. And there's our shy ball. He's super shy. Just the shyest, the most shy. Just extremely shy. So, thank you all for joining me. Let me put this on manual again. Thank you all for joining me. want me to whisper a little bit more about some interesting things you can do in Resonite. Bye-bye. Thank you. Oh, wait, no, that's not my outro.